and welcome to another edition of Agenda 2063 TV show, the only show in Ghana, the region, continent, telling authentic and true stories about the African Union and its institutions. Although we spend the better part of the series speaking about areas related to the African Continental Free Trade Area, we are always going to come back to the mother project, which is Agenda 2063, for which reason we have two segments, APRM Watch and Here in East Africa, which is taking a break. Here in East Africa takes a break today. I'll be back next week, but today we'll have APRM Watch, which will be your usual and concise updates of developments around the African peer review mechanism. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back in a minute. Welcome back from the break. My name is E.K Bensah Jr., your regular host, and I'm always happy to be presenting the Africa Peer Review Mechanism Watch, APRM Watch. And in this segment, we just want to really give you a very quick update, zoom into the developments around the African Peer Review Mechanism, what's happening, some of its activities, maybe what's happening on its Twitter feeds, that kind of thing. And so today, one of the things that we've been monitoring on the Twitter feed is the fact that the APRM is still working. Of course, it cannot stop because COVID has come. All of us are working. And even though last week we talked about the African Governance Report, they are still working on that report in different ways, shapes, and forms. And one of them ways in which they're doing that is by looking at the world of Africa in 2063. So how will Africa governance look like in 2063? To be fair, one of the biggest projects that they have been working on and have undertaken has been the preparation for the 2021 version of this report. And even though I referenced it last week in my Close Encounters editorial, it's important to come back to it very briefly so that we get a sense, we're able to connect the dots. So evidently the COVID pandemic has really stymied, frustrated efforts around preparations for the African Governance Report, because normally they would have been going around the continent speaking to policymakers, civil society organizations, that kind of thing, to get some insights. But with the virtual world, it is always possible to do some things. And so just suffice to say that what they're trying to do is that with the APRM, the African Governance Architecture, which is the platform that brings together all the institutions that looks at governance and democracy. So that's the Pan-African Parliament, AU Anti-Corruption Board, APRM itself, and these similar institutions. What they're trying to do is, together with the African Governance Architecture and the Institute for Futures Research, which is an academic institution based in South Africa, they have invited people into the process of developing the Africa Governance Report 2021 as they imagine the future of Africa's governance in 2063. That's a long kind of projection to do, but they're trying to do it. So from 8th to 11th September, what the APRM sought to do was to work on a focus group scenario building workshop to commence this all-important discussion. So they looked at so many different scenarios, but the key ones which they have put out on the Twitter feed was they looked at a scenario that they call the wildcard scenario, where the unexpected or surprise scenario that has come up aims to avoid a tunnel vision approach to planning for the future that is based on current experiences and knowledge. So the whole idea behind this wildcard scenario is to encourage a proactive preparedness. That is to prepare yourself, anticipating whatever might come, whatever futures may exist, rather than a reactive response to unexpected events that may come. We always know conflicts will come. Coups may come here and there, being on the continent. So what is it that in your governance reporting you can anticipate as you seek to look at how governance may look like in 2063? Then there's the other end of the spectrum, where they call it the dystopia scenario, which represents the worst case scenario for African governance futures, where by 2063, African governance goals have not been attained, where there's still coups, where there's still conflicts, where the continent is still exploited, where the worst eventualities have occurred. An example of such a scenario, for example, would be African governance in 2063, where the continent is in decay and in decline. Now, we'd like to think that this dystopia scenario is something that we can quietly put on the shelf somewhere away, because it's unlikely to happen. We do not want to see it. With all the optimism that has been going on around Africa and the AU, I think this is something that we we are praying will not happen. And I think the right mechanisms are in place to ensure that this kind of dystopia future can be dispelled, especially as the AU prepares itself for new reforms in 2021. In 2021, the AU will be, and it's already even started. You will see on Google and on Twitter different discussions, different areas where the AU is actually has gotten recommendations, has gotten candidates vying for the commissioner of peace and political affairs, peace and security, which is now the new structure for the AU. The AU has now merged the peace and security, the Department of Political Affairs with Peace and Security Department to become Political Affairs, Peace and Security. And the candidates, and looking through the list of the candidates, there are about 3 women for the positions, and most of them are men. There are about, out of the 12 or so, most of them are men. So that's a lot of work for women to also work. Why is it that in peace and security, more men are still applying for that position, when clearly women are also natural peacemakers? So that's a topic for another day. But it's still part of the governance conversation. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll still be referring to issues around AU reform as we look through what the APRM can do and is doing and is anticipating for the next couple of months up ahead. Thank you very much for this all-important update. We're going to take a break and we'll zoom straight into the main discussion. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break and welcome to the final edition of the editorial. At long last, the battle has ended. This editorial is over. So basically today's editorial marks the close of the 4 editorials, one story concept that we introduced to the show as an innovation to regular interviews. Last week, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, APRM and the Pursuit for Afro-Democracy, sought to use Hollywood and alien beings and all this to help explain the African peer review mechanism in a unique and interesting way. But today, we still stick with the creative arts. Creative arts is always very useful for us. It's always a good way of keeping momentum on issues. And so with the creative arts, we're going to music, specifically Tasmin Archer's 1990s hit, Sleeping Satellite. So today's title is entitled Don't Blame Me for Sleeping Satellite, AfCFTA's Great Expectations. Now, this song is a very underrated song that has profound lyrics speaking to big ideas about the world, how the world has been grappling for decades with some of these issues. Number one, environmental protection, climate change, and so much more. And it uses a lot of references to the satellite that is on the moon and people going to space and what is it, that we've been able to do. Have we gone too far? Have we really understood what it takes for humanity, for the things that we have promised humanity, and so on? And basically, it's using words that speak to what we may call grandiosity and the gargantuan world that is not living up to the task of the promises to humanity. We can still say that a lot of that is still going on. Hence, the reason for silencing the guns is necessity. COVID is now one of the new things that has come, and history will definitely look very kindly on what COVID has, its impact, the devastating impact on our lives. But that these lyrics are superimposed onto a respectable tune makes this a very, very noteworthy song. So if you have yet to listen to it, go out and have a listen to it. It's a good song in its own right. So what we have done is we've been a bit mischievous, and today we've appropriated, maybe even extrapolated the lyrics and been heavily inspired to tell the tale of the African Continental Free Trade Area with just references of some of these lyrics. But first of all, let's get back to the past a little. It's always good to get back to the past, or what do they say, back to the future. So let's start off with 2011, right here in Accra. 2011, the AU Ministers of Trade were here in Accra at some hotel somewhere. I'm not quite sure which hotel, but they always stay in some very nice, posh hotels. So they were there. But the AU Trade Commissioner at the time was one Chadian called Fatima Haram Assil. I remember, celebrating her all over the place because I really was following her, liking her for the kind of things that she was doing, promoting Africa at the time, saying that Africa had its own plan and its agenda, no to economic partnership agreements, that kind of thing. In many ways, she was a poster child of assertiveness over the West at the time, because at that time, there was a lot of noise of the West, especially the European Union, trying to put pressure on Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and all the other member states of West Africa for, to sign the economic partnership agreements. So at that time, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Erastus Mwencha from Zambia, stated something similar to what, this commissioner had talked of, Fatima Harama still talked about, in an interview on local TV here in Accra, when he explained that the member states were not going to pursue the EPAs. He actually said no to EPAs. That was the quote that was in one of the local papers at the time, as countries had their own programs. And the programs that he was referring to, of course, was what was then the Continental Free Trade Area. It was not then the African Continental Free Trade Area. It was then known as a Continental Free Trade Area, CFTA. So it would be that after 2011 and that momentous and grandiose claim, 2012 would come upon us, and in Addis in particular, for all of us who were monitoring Addis at the time, or at least some of us were looking at what that summit was going to bring out. And in 2012, a very key important summit where heads of state decided to dedicate the theme of that summit to boosting intra-African trade. So the whole idea was to say that, look, we have this whole trade structure. It is not enough. We're not trading among ourselves enough. I mean, we may be trading within our regions, okay. ECOWAS may be trading well within its regions, SADC, COMESA, EAC, and so on. But are we really trading across the region well enough? Across the continent well enough? And so the heads of state in their wisdom decided that they really needed to fast track this. Now, interestingly, this summit came about as a result of the 2011 summit that had been held in Kigali. Once again, you'll notice that Rwanda has been very key in this. That had been held in Kigali, where that Kigali summit was seeking to fast-track the establishment of the Continental Free Trade Area. At that time, sure, it was still called the Continental Free Trade Area. So already, when you're looking back and you're trying to look at the countries that have played a key role, let's think of Rwanda, let's think of Addis, let's think of Ghana, and so on, because it is said in for the history books, and I think Joseph Atamensa said this a couple of weeks ago when I interviewed him about the centrality of Ghana in this conversation on boosting inter-African trade, where you had the late President Atta Mills supporting, as well as the incumbent trade minister right now, Lantre Martin, in his own different ways as well, supporting the idea of this whole boosting inter-African trade. And so clearly, the supporting inter-African trade has been something that has cut across party lines, which is very good to hear. It's something that we can all celebrate, that there's this vision, there's this understanding that, trade is important and trade can help lift us out of poverty. But of course, if we're talking about trade, we also have to talk about industrialization, because trading alone is not enough. Once you trade, what are you trading for? What are you trading towards? What is the output? And so we need to have that conversation where it will not just go into discussions about trade, but move from trade to industrializing, to productive capacities and that kind of thing. And we've seen a lot of developments over the years that have spoken to this, and even this year, even before the commissioning of the Secretariat a few weeks ago and so on. So there are some very positive signals that are happening that speak to the idea that Africa will get out of this mess. And we're very happy that all this is happening. But let's also remember that even as we talk about intra-African trade, it's important to also situate it in the context of the regional economic communities, because at the end of the day, let's also remember that there's the Abuja Treaty, which is still there. The Abuja Treaty is still the fine, important thread running through this whole conversation on the African Continental Free Trade Area, because at the end of the day, the stage 4, we are on stage 4. Once we are done with the African Continental Free Trade Area, we are going to move into the Continental Customs Union, and then finally the African Continental Market. And the Abuja Treaty states that by 2034, which is only 14 years away, we should have a common market running across the continent. Now, some of us are quite skeptical that this will happen by 2034. But as with the aspirations of the Agenda 2063, I think we can place some faith in the fact that we can aspire to make that effort to get there by 2034, even if we miss it by a long shot, by a few years, at least we would have gotten there. Because when you get back to the history, we will see, for example, that what actually built this whole momentum around the African Continental Free Trade Area, if we really think about it, was 2015. 2015 was a very important year for a lot of people, especially as far as inter-African trade, the AU was concerned. Because I remember even in Accra, it was all over the place, this discussion that finally we are making some headway on the African Union. What was this about? This was the establishment of the three blocks merging together. That was COMESA, the Common Market for East and Southern Africa, SADC, Southern African Development Community, and East Africa Community coming together as one block to trade. And there was a lot of noise about that, wow, Africa is finally getting its act together. And then people were wondering what would then happen to ECOWAS and maybe the Arab Maghreb Union and some of the regional blocks. Were they also going to merge into 2 or 3 blocks? That was, in fact, the original idea, to do that merging and then finally come together as African Continental Free Trade Area. But of course, the momentum on the Continental Free Trade Area was still happening. And so even as the Tripartite Free Trade Area, which is what it is now known as, linking COMESA with East Africa Community and SADC, still exists, and tariff discussions are still going on, and they're trying to find what benefits will accrue to that region, and so on. What we do know is that the Tripartite Free Trade Area certainly inspired member states and policymakers to consider the fact that, well, it wouldn't actually be a bad idea to have a continental free trade area. And besides, it is not as if they were really reinventing the wheel. It was because it was also consistent with what was already there. Now you superimpose all these discussions against the fact that there was an Agenda 2063, which had started in 2013, and therefore in that Agenda 2063, one of the flagship programs had been the fact that you are going to have this African Continental Free Trade Area being one of the key programs, one of the flagship programs of the Continental, of the Agenda 2063. So once we realized that was happening, it just became so very important for member states then to say, look, okay, so we have the Agenda 2063, we have the flagship program that exists, with the African Continental Free Trade being one of them, with the fast train, continental train being another, with the African Museum being another, with so many other flagship things that are there. But what is it that we can really do to make this African Continental Free Trade Area work? And so what they then decided to do was to really fast track it. The date that originally existed was 2016, 2017. And when you look at the history books and when you speak to the policymakers, Rwanda, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and all these officials, they will tell you that there have been so many trade deals that have existed. Even the WTO, there's the Uruguay round that has been going on since the 1940s, and it still has not ended. And yet along comes this innocuous, or apparently innocuous, African Continental Free Trade Area. And before you know it, this free trade area, member states are signing here, left, right. One day you wake up and 10 member states have signed it. Another day, 5 member states have signed it. So for me, for some of us who are looking at some kind of even African Continental Free Trade Area governance, we would like to say that there is what we will call after governance, the African Continental Free Trade Area governance and African Continental Free Trade Area momentum that can probably be extrapolated to different regional economic communities as we go along. There definitely has to be that kind of conversation, because there was some zeitgeist, if you will, some spirit of the time that was within the air that was just getting member states to want to sign the African Continental Free Trade Area. It was so impressive, so inspiring. And even if Nigeria has not ratified yet for reasons which we can explain in a larger conversation one of these days, at least they have signed it. And Niger has been one of the countries that have been also the champions of the AU on the African Continental Free Trade. All these are very, very important things which speak to the shared values, speak to the fact that the Africans can actually come together when they really need to and when they want to as well, when they identify something that they can really, really, that they can really work with. So, in conclusion, in summary, I guess what we can really say about this editorial is that while this program includes the recognition that other AU institutions have done their bit to consolidate what we were calling in the editorial Africa's A game, there's no gainsaying that the three that have been referenced in this editorial are central to the understanding of the trajectory and the future of Africa's integration, because there's no conversation can be had about AU reforms or the AU's future, how it can be conducted without referencing Abuja Treaty, APRM, or the African Continental Free Trade Area. With the onset of the African Continental Free Trade Area, it was clear that we shot for the stars. The question is, was it too giant a step? Have Africans got what it takes to carry the weight of this concept of the African Continental Free Trade Area on their shoulders? With the Secretariat right here in Accra, we cannot afford to let the opportunities for growth, transformation, and industrialization pass us by. Like a shot in the dark, missed the mark with a sense of adventure. Finally, it was always going to be easier to identify people who could be interviewed in this editorial in place of producing 4 editorials underscoring the one-story concept of the AU as a global player in consonance with Aspiration 7 of Agenda 2063. Everyone has experienced the African Union differently. And so the editorials were in many ways an opportunity to help demystify the African Union to a wide range of people and to get them to understand why they needed to pay a little bit more attention to the African Union, even as the ECOWAS, even as the African Continental Free Trade Secretariat is around. To a lot of people, and to be fair, we don't blame them, the African Union is about heads of states having unnecessary meetings and coming out with policies that are barely ever implemented. We mustn't forget that the tea that they're always drinking as well. That's one thing a lot of people see. Somehow they're always drinking tea. I'm not sure why they're not drinking coffee or Milo. It's just tea that they're drinking at these conferences. But thankfully, though, I have had the privilege of experiencing an insider-outsider relationship with the Continental organization. I've been privileged to attend some of the actual AU meetings at the AU Commission in Addis itself and across some of the meetings across the continent. I've even been able to talk to some of the actual AU staff from who have worked in different AU organs. Some have left me very indifferent, not really working or doing anything. Others have really inspired me. They're just ordinary people who have been able to work as hard as you and I and gotten lucky to have applied and gotten an AU job. It's just sometimes it's all about luck and whom you know and contacts and all these things. But there are a lot of very smart people who work at the AU, and of course there are always, as with every profession and organization like that, there are also some very unsmart people, let's put it that way, whom you wonder how they ended up there, but that's for another day. But I had always wanted to look at how this whole conversation around the AU was going to go, because it was important to get some level of policy coherence and understanding of what the AU really meant. Was after a separate animal from the AU, from Agenda 2063 and all these things. And so when I had the opportunity to do some radio and return to Ghana, it was then that I actually started getting invites by the AU to cover some events across the continent and so on. And then over time, it graduated to being invited to moderate some events and contribute to events in Addis, Nairobi, Abidjan, wherever God took me. The bottom line is that the AU is and has always been more than the AU staff traveling across the continent to attend meetings just for the sake of attending them. the continent's impressive narrative on peace and security, the fact that we are trying to silence the guns, the fact that there's a level of relative peace and stability on the continent is in large part due to a slew of very smart ambassadors, very backdoor smart African elites who can get people to sit down and talk peace. Let's not take that away from them. Kofi Annan is one of them, but there are a whole number of people whose stories have yet to be written, who have led a lot of peace efforts and who are African. And some of them have also even been women. So the AU story on peace and security is a story that needs to be told. But because the continent has spent so much time talking about peace and security, you can be forgiven for thinking that sometimes that is all that matters. And democracy and third-term coups and constitutions, that's the only thing that matters. It is not. There are numerous AU agencies doing great work, and the reason why I singled out the Abuja Treaty, APRM, and the African Continental Free Trade Area as 3 parts of the AU's programming was because he felt that it could help speak to the organization as a global player. And what better way, again, than through the optics of the media to help people relate to these editorials. In 2020, the buzzword is, apart from COVID, is all about the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AfCFTA. And if we are to carry the weight of the concept of any kind of AfCFTA governance, or even any AfCFTA momentum that I referred to earlier, then we need to know how we got here, including why we want an #AfricaWeWant, which is all over the place on Twitter. AfCFTA is an opportunity to elude squandering the chance in the rush of the race for development and industrialization. Let us not be accused of peaking too soon with the African Continental Free Trade Area. Let's get the policy coherence right around AfCFTA to ensure that it includes the recognition that this has just never been about intra-African trade, but indeed about dispelling the crisis of implementation around AU programs. But most importantly, validating the all-important mothership of the Agenda 2063. My name is E.K Bensah Jr. It was a pleasure putting this editorial together. I hope to have this in write-ups so that people can take it to wherever, their classrooms and their studios, whatever, for further scrutiny. And we feel that it's important to have Africans creating content that is by us, not just necessarily stories, non-fiction and otherwise, but stories that we can create without waiting for consultants and donors to come and tell it for us. We should be able to tell our own stories, and in different and unique ways. And we hope that we've been able to tell that in the 4 editorials, 1 story concept that we brought to you, with this conclusion ending today. Thank you very much for taking time to listen to us and join us on our channel, and be catching all the programs on the AAU TV channel as well. Thank you for always making time, and I hope to be able to read more comments from you also on WhatsApp, on Facebook, email, on Twitter. We are at AU_67. And you can also find Association of African Universities both on Facebook and on Twitter, and the social media channels, including YouTube. And to all those who have made comments to us and to different staff of AUTV about the show, we are deeply grateful for the time that you have taken to comment, because not everybody does that. It helps us strengthen the content and strengthen what we're trying to do so that we can reach out to better audiences. So thank you once again to all those who have taken time out to comment, taken time out to watch the show in your rooms, in your laptops, in your spaces. And we hope to be able to bring you better and more interesting content over the next couple of weeks. And certainly it's going to be as exciting and as mischievous as we can try and make it be. Thank you once again. My name is E.K Bensah Jr., your regular host. We hope to speak to you next time. We hope you have a great day. Thank you and goodbye. And certainly it's going to be as exciting and as mischievous as we can try and make it be. Thank you once again. My name is E.K Bensah Jr., your regular host. We hope to speak to you next time. and we hope you have a great day. So able to bring